Well, hello everybody. Welcome to this live stream. I hope you can all hear me. I'm here in Brittany, France. My name is Richard Knoll, if you don't know me already. If you're a beekeeper in the Northern Hemisphere, I hope you're having a great season and we're going towards the end of the season. If you're coming towards if you're in the Southern Hemisphere beekeeper, then I bet you're looking forward to spring. We're all done. We're all getting pretty tired now. It's coming towards the end here. And that's the reason I'm here. I was in my apiary the other day thinking about things and thinking how difficult it is for us to get our queens over the line and get mating done and honey off. And then I've heard about this pest, Tropilaelaps Mite, and I really wanted to do something. I really wanted to bring people together to discuss it. And I have someone for you tonight who knows all about Tropilaelaps. So I think it would be absolutely brilliant to bring this to the forefront now while we've got a little bit of time to start thinking about things. So I'm going to bring in Maggie Gill, who is one of the founding members. You are the founding member, Maggie. Hello, yes. Welcome to the live stream of Phira Science.
Hi, thanks, Richard. How are you?
No problem. Brilliant to have you on tonight. I'm a little bit fired up because I really wanted to get this across really well. We've got a lot of people on from all over the world. I really wanted them to go away with an idea of what Tropilaelaps potentially could do, and it's no joke. It really is a nasty pest. It really is something that we should be aware of because it's very close to us. I remember, I will mention him, Mike Palmer said this to me about 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm like a lot of other people at the moment are like, oh, well, I think it's a long way off and it'll be fine and blah, blah, blah. But I don't honestly feel it is now. I feel we're at the point now in our beekeeping where if we have another major pest that comes in, it could spell the end for many industries and many things. It's just not worth carrying on. So what I'm hoping tonight is that we can put things into place. We'll have more of an idea of where it is, more of an idea of perhaps strategies that we can do as beekeepers. And we're going to hopefully have questions and answers at the end of it. So all the people out there, if you want to text me questions or send them obviously on the text here on the side of the screen. I'll see if I can write them down and we'll see if we can fire them out at the end. I have got a load of questions here for Maggie that she's probably dreading that I'm going to run them off as we go. But I'll be after, and maybe some of them, well, I'm sure a lot of them will be answered already. But the whole objective is to ask on a beekeeper's level, what do we need to do? What can we do to make sure that the biosecurity stays good? If we want to buy queens, should we be buying them? All this kind of thing like that. So Maggie, I'll start off by saying, as far as I know, and I'm aware, Tropilaelaps is a mite that was on Apis dorsalis. Is that correct?
Yes. So the giant Asian honeybees.
And they're the ones that we see on the books like Nepal Honey Hunters, stuff like that, the big slab bees.
Yeah. So yeah, they're quite a bit bigger than our Western honeybees. Very different sort of biology. So they are an Apis species of bee, so that they're a honeybee. So so that's how Tropilaelaps is able to jump species onto them. But yeah, they're the ones that you sort of see on the internet, and you have honey hunters climbing cliffs and things to go and access them.
Yeah, and how long ago did the mite Tropilaelaps actually jump over from Apis dorsalis to Apis Melifera? How long ago, roughly?
So Western honeybees aren't native to Asia, so they were introduced sort of end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, and different countries in Asia kind of introduced them at different times. I think Tropilaelaps probably jumped species sort of 70 or 80 years ago. So pretty early on after Western honeybees were introduced, right. So it didn't take a long time. It's what happened with Varroa. So Varroa naturally infests the eastern honeybee, Apis cerana, and at the same time we introduced the Western honeybees. Varroa jump species, Tropilaelaps jump species, and that's kind of been the Asian beekeeping picture with Western honeybees. They've always had this sort of interaction of mites and bees, and so have kind of evolved beekeeping alongside them.
Okay. So would you like to do your presentation now, and we can pick the bones out of it after?
Yeah. So yeah,
not in a bad way, but in a good way that's going to educate us all. Sorry.
If everybody sort of if they send you questions in the chat, and then we can sort of cover everything.
Okay.
Just share my screen.
Yeah, I'm just going to. Well, I've got that now, so I'm going to add you in, and hopefully
Perfect.
Right, there we go. I'm just going to remove you and I'm going to give you the full screen now, okay?
Brilliant.
So there we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. And it's over to you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. And hopefully my internet will hold out. I live in Wales and it's all a bit, can be a bit sort of temperamental at times. So yeah, Richard, just shout at me if it all sort of starts going a bit wrong. But yeah, hello. Really excited to be here. Really excited that everybody's showing so much interest in the work and in Tropilaelaps. So yeah, here to talk to you about Tropilaelaps. And first I'll sort of give you a bit of background about me and who I am. So Tropilaelaps, it's been growing in interest for the last sort of 2 to 3 years. As Richard said, it's a parasitic mite. It originated in Asia, but in 2024, it was confirmed for the first time in Western Russia and in Georgia. And that is the first time that Tropilaelaps has been discovered on mainland Europe, and it's causing significant colony losses there. A little bit about me. So I am a beekeeper. I've kept bees for about 20 years. I became an entomologist and a honeybee researcher sort of after becoming a beekeeper. In the United Kingdom, we have the National Bee Unit, which is the government agency that does all of the statutory pest and disease inspections. So I worked for the National Bee Unit for 10 years. That's me in the picture at the bottom there, doing a fowl brood inspection. 18 months ago, I moved over to DEFRA, and I'm a senior entomologist there. I specialise in pollinators. I started working on Tropilaelaps while I was with the National Bee Unit in 2022, helped to develop some monitoring techniques that the bee inspectors use now. But myself and 4 other bee inspectors went to Thailand and we did this work, and it was seeing Tropilaelaps in the flesh, so to speak, and how it affected the bees there that kind of really shocked us. Initially it was just, let's go and develop monitoring techniques, and we didn't really consider Tropilaelaps to be a massive pest. Obviously it's sort of statutory notifiable, but yeah, seeing it in real life concerned us, and that's how the research has progressed and how the projects have grown. And I'm going to sort of take you through lots of things tonight. So yeah, here we go. Right, so firstly, to understand Tropilaelaps, you need to know a bit about bees and a bit about honeybees. And obviously I've got a picture of a wasp here. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about evolution because, this all sort of plays into it and it helps you understand Tropilaelaps a bit better. So millions of years ago, the bees evolved from wasps. So wasps are primarily carnivores, and bees evolved when, so there came a point when there was so much competition for that meat resource that some of those wasps decided that instead they would start to feed on flowers, and they got their protein from pollen and they got their carbohydrate from nectar. And so essentially bees are vegetarian wasps. And through the course of evolution, there are 20,000 different species of bee worldwide. Some are solitary, some are social. You've got bumblebees, honeybees, and all of that. So, and one of those species of bee is Apis. So honeybees, they all come from this genus Apis, and originally they nested in cavities such as hollow trees, and they did this to protect themselves and their brood and their honey from predators. So there are 5 species of the cavity nesting honeybee. So you will be familiar with the Western honeybee, Apis Melifera. That's probably what the majority of you keep as honeybees. But there is also the Asian honeybee, Apis cerana, the red honeybee, the mountain honeybee, the Sulawesi honeybee. So those final 3 species of honeybee, they're only really found in Malaysia and Indonesia, but the Western honeybee and the Asian honeybee are the most widespread in the world. And at some point during this evolutionary process, it turned out that there started to be a lot of competition for those cavities to nest in. And again, some bees decided that they wouldn't nest in cavities, instead that they would nest out in the open. And these open nesting bees decided to develop 2 evolutionary strategies to sort of protect themselves when they nested out in the open, because obviously they then didn't have that cavity to nest in. And the first strategy, or one of the strategies, was to become really, really big. So the giant honeybees, Apis dorsata, Apis laboriosa, they evolved. They are big bees, they have big combs, they nest very high up on tall cliffs and in big trees. This makes their nests very hard to access. And if a predator does manage to access that nest, there is a lot of very big bees there to protect it. The other evolutionary strategy that evolved was to become very, very small. So the dwarf honeybees evolved, and we have the red dwarf honeybee, Apis Melifera, and the black dwarf honeybee, Apis andreniformis. And these bees build very small nests. They hide away in the undergrowth. They kind of secrete themselves. If a predator comes along and finds their nest, they just abscond, they abandon the comb, and they just rebuild elsewhere, and they can do that quite quickly and quite easily. And all of these open nesting bees, so they just build a single comb. It has honey at the top wherever it attaches to whatever. It has brood underneath, and to protect that brood, from predators and from the elements, you have several layers of bees. And this is the tropics, so it can be very hot. You can have monsoons, and you've just got these bees protecting that brood and maintaining temperature and maintaining humidity. So on the left, I've just put in a bit of a scale so you can appreciate the different sizes that we're talking about. You've got the red dwarf honeybee at the top there, which is the smallest. In the middle, you've got Apis Melifera, our western honeybee, and then you can see how much bigger those giant honeybee species are compared to our western honeybees. And then the interesting thing in this evolutionary process was that at some point during this process, when there were just cavity nesting bees, continents shifted, seas formed, something happened, and one group of cavity nesting bees were confined in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, and they went on to evolve and become our western honeybee. And the other group of cavity nesting bees that were confined in Southeast Asia went on, and they evolved into those further 8 species of honeybee. And you've got the cavity nesting bees, and you've got the giant honeybees, and you've got the dwarf honeybees. So whereas we had no evolution, so to speak, these bees went on and developed into all sorts of different survival strategies. Okay, so that's all very interesting, but what has that got to do with Tropilaelaps? Well, at the point when you had your cavity nesting bees that were confined to Europe and Africa and the Middle East, you also had the other group of cavity nesting bees that were confined in Southeast Asia. And at that point, that's when parasitization occurred. And the Asian cavity nesting honeybees were parasitized. And as this evolution went on, so as they developed into open nesting bees and dwarf bees and giant honeybees, so did the parasites. And so with the cavity nesting honeybees, they are naturally infested with Varroa. The giant Asian honeybees are naturally infested with Tropilaelaps, and the dwarf honeybees are naturally infested with Varroa. So Tropilaelaps are in the Laelapidae family. They're thought to have evolved from pollen mites, which are also Laelapidae. Varroa and Varroa are more closely related to each other. It's thought that they're more evolved, so they've evolved from Tropilaelaps. They have their own, they are Varroidae. And when you see the three of them together and the way they act and their kind of behavior and a bit of their biology, it kind of makes sense. You can see that progression of evolution from Tropilaelaps to Varroa to Varroa. So some facts about Laelapidae. They're a very large family of mites. They are predominantly predatory and parasitic. There's over 140 different genera of Laelapidae. 35 of those parasitize mammals, and there are reports out there that Tropilaelaps can survive on mammals such as rats. I'm going to sort of come back to that in a bit. Similarly, there are several types of Laelapidae that parasitize different bee species. And again, there are reports out there that potentially Tropilaelaps can survive on bumblebees and carpenter bees. Again, I'll come back to that in a bit. And I'll cover that in a few slides. As I said, it's thought that Tropilaelaps came from the Melififis, which is the pollen mites. So in this picture here, you have top left, you've got Varroa. Top middle, you've got Tropilaelaps Mercedesae. Top right, you've got Varroa coeca. Bottom left, you've got Varroa. And right in the middle there is the pollen mite. And these are kind of, well, hopefully you won't find Tropilaelaps or Varroa in your hives, but you might find Varroa. You'll probably find Varroa. And you'll probably find the pollen mites. And if you look at the pollen mite, it is kind of like a little mini version of a Tropilaelaps mite. Very similar morphologically. Tropilaelaps is just a bit bigger. And as I said, a bit more about Tropilaelaps. They infest the giant honeybee species. There are 4 species of Tropilaelaps, but only 2 of those have jumped species to our western honeybees. So that's Tropilaelaps Mercedesae and Tropilaelaps clari. And the concerning thing is it's that those tropical mites can now survive and reproduce in temperate climates, and they are spreading westwards, and they're kind of tracking along pretty much the same route that Varroa did back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So briefly tell you a little bit about the giant honeybees. I think they're really cool. I really like working with them. So this is the giant Asian honeybee, Apis dorsata. They nest in tall trees and on the side of buildings. Apis laboriosa is the Himalayan giant honeybee, so they nest in cliffs in the Himalayas, as the name suggests. So these bees are migratory, and they will nest in a location while there is nectar and pollen available. And this is probably from sort of December, January-ish through to about mid-July. But when there is a dearth in that nectar, they will migrate, and they migrate over hundreds of miles. And during this migration, they don't build combs. So instead, they do what's called bivouacking, which is probably what we would describe as like a swarm cluster. And they will spend several weeks, possibly even several months. Nobody kind of is really quite sure what they do, because it's quite hard to track them when they migrate. But during this time, it's thought that they're completely broodless. And something that's not fully understood is what happens with Tropilaelaps during this broodless period, because Tropilaelaps have co-evolved with them, and nobody knows. And it's something that I'm sort of really interested in. I'd love to find out more about that. But anyway, after several months, they migrate up into the mountains, and then as the sort of season comes to an end, they will then migrate back down. And the really interesting thing is that they always return to exactly the same location. And I'm not just talking about like the same general area. They return to the same tree. They return to the same building. DNA testing has been done, and again, that's just an amazing feat. How do these bees migrate hundreds of miles and then come back to exactly the same place? So I put a picture of me there. Just that's the same tree. You can kind of see the scale of these trees. The Buddha was huge, like you could see it on Google Earth. But the other thing is, so all of the colonies that you see in that tree and that you see on that Buddha, they're all related to each other. So they're all like mother, sister, daughter colonies. And they're just a fascinating bee species. Okay, a bit about reproduction. So are Tropilaelaps a problem for Western honeybees? Well, yes, unfortunately they are. That's why we're kind of here. So in areas such as Russia and Georgia, where they were confirmed last year, the reports kind of vary a bit, but they're reporting colony losses of between sort of 50 and 80%. And one of the reasons for this is the way that Tropilaelaps reproduce. So with Varroa, quickly go through Varroa reproduction. Female mite, she goes into the cell, she hides under a larvae, and when that cell is sealed, she emerges, she lays an egg. That first egg always hatches out to be a male. She then lays subsequent eggs every few days. They all hatch out to be female. They go through a series of molts before they're mature and before they can survive outside of those cells. But these sort of families of Varroa mites, they set up a communal feeding site on the brood, and they all just feed from that sort of 1 or maybe 2 feeding sites. And from an infested worker cell, on average, you'll get 1.6 viable Varroa mites emerge from that, and from a drone cell, you will get 2.6 viable Varroa mites emerge. So Tropilaelaps are similar. They reproduce in the sealed brood. Female goes into the cell before it's capped. She lays eggs over multiple days. However, they have a higher reproductive rate than Varroa. So on average, actually, I put this slide together probably at the end of 2024. And I think sort of since working in Georgia, I think that actually this is potentially a bit of an underestimation in their reproductive rate. But, we'll talk about that in a bit. But anyway, they go into the cell, the foundress lays eggs, and so from a worker cell, they can produce potentially sort of 3 Tropilaelaps mites, and from a drone cell, that can be sort of up to 4.5 Tropilaelaps mites. But the thing that Tropilaelaps does differently is that, so firstly, they can reproduce by parthenogenesis. So that means that a female mite can produce viable male and female offspring, even if she hasn't mated. And when it comes to the mite feeding, they don't communally feed in the same way that Varroa do. Instead, they create multiple wounds on that brood, and those wounds then go on. So if it doesn't kill the brood, as the bee develops, that then goes on to develop as deformities in the adult bee. And if you have adult bees emerge that have these deformities, they have deformed wings, which we're also probably quite familiar with, but deformed antennae, deformed feet, deformed proboscises. Those bees can't function and they can't contribute to the colony as a whole. So it really weakens the colony as a superorganism level, and it significantly shortens the adult bee's life. Tropilaelaps, they also vector viruses when they feed on brood. So Varroa does this. But our bees have a level of immunity to those viruses. And I kind of liken it. So it's a bit like, we're all probably have a level of immunity to the common cold. It goes around. Some people get quite sick from it, but generally the majority of the population are fine. The viruses that Tropilaelaps vector, though, are different strains of these viruses that Varroa already vector. So Israeli acute paralysis virus, deformed wing virus, things like that. And it's a bit like when COVID hit the population. So the general population didn't have an immunity to it. And what you see is it causes very high mortality because there's just not the resistance to these different strains of virus. So another issue when dealing with Tropilaelaps is that it's very hard to tell when you're looking at a colony, are the symptoms that you see caused by Varroa or caused by Tropilaelaps? Because essentially it's just parasitic mite syndrome. So with both mites, you will see a pepper pot brood pattern. You'll see a chewed up brood where the adult bees have chewed it up and they're trying to remove it. Sometimes you'll see adult bees that have died while they're emerging from the cells and they have their proboscis sticking out. And any brood that doesn't die, it goes on to produce adult bees that are smaller, they have stunted abdomens, they have deformed wings. If you're looking for actual Tropilaelaps mites in the colony, so in Thailand, where the beekeeping is a bit different, it was quite hard to spot the Tropilaelaps mites in the colony. So these two films are from Thailand, and you can see them running around on the combs there, but they're not sort of really apparent. I was very shocked when I went to Georgia because you opened a hive, you took the crown board off it, and you could see the mites. So previously, I would say it was very difficult to spot Tropilaelaps mites in the colony. That wasn't the case in Georgia, but they are very small mites. They are 1 millimeter long. They are 0.5 millimeter wide. In these pictures, I've shaken the bees off the frames. If you've got lots of bees there, it is quite difficult to see them. So I've added in this picture. So this picture I took in Georgia, and I didn't sort of really take it for any particular reason. It's at a bit of a funny angle, but I was going through photos for this presentation, and I thought I added it in because this actually shows some of the symptoms of that parasitic mite syndrome from a Tropilaelaps infestation. Now, I wasn't sure how it would appear on the screen, so I went through and I've put red dots where any open brood that is dead and has some sort of issue with it, I've put a red dot there, and any adult bee that had deformed wings or any other deformity, I've put a blue dot on there. So what initially looks like an okay frame of brood, actually, when you look more closely at it and you look at the brood and you look at the open brood, there wasn't actually any open brood in this that was alive. And the colony actually had quite a significant level of Tropilaelaps and was probably on the point of collapse. But if you're just sort of glancing through and just going through a colony and not sort of really focused and really looking for Tropilaelaps, it is something that you might potentially miss. So distribution, Tropilaelaps is spreading westward. This map shows the range of the giant Asian honeybees in dark blue. And you can see that Tropilaelaps has spread well beyond that range, and they've done this on, Western honeybees, and that has predominantly been the fault of beekeepers. So it's been migratory beekeepers, people selling bees. There has been some natural spread, but it will be mostly beekeepers that have spread them around. The concerning thing about this map is that they have spread out of tropical regions and into temperate areas. So South Korea, China, Russia, they all have very cold winters. Some of them are much colder than the UK, and Tropilaelaps is surviving and reproducing there. And people aren't kind of really sure how they're managing to do that. And so this is some footage that I took in Thailand. So in 2024, we did some research and we were looking at how effective oxalic acid sublimation was as a Tropilaelaps treatment. And we had two groups so we had the treatment group and we had the non-treatment group, and we purchased the colonies. And the first video that you see there was probably a couple of days into the thing, and all of the colonies were very standardized. They were all 7 frames of bees, 6 frames of brood. You can see nice covering of bees there, reasonable size colony. This second video is taken 3 weeks later in one of the non-treatment colonies, and you can see that there are very few bees left. You can see that patchy brood pattern, and this was really quite shocking for us because this was the first time in Asia we'd come across colonies that hadn't been treated, because the majority of beekeepers, certainly in Thailand that we work with, just perpetually treat their hives to kind of manage the Tropilaelaps, and to see a colony reach the point of collapse after 3 weeks was quite shocking for us. We did our oxalic acid study, and I'll talk about the results at the end of this presentation. But one of the kind of issues that we had with that was that there is this difference in Asian beekeeping and Thai hives, and one of the big differences is that the colony size. So they have significantly smaller colonies. The climate is obviously quite hotter, so it was hard to kind of say how realistic and relevant any studies that we did in Thailand are when you kind of extrapolate that to Western hives and Western beekeeping. So this shows typical beekeeping in Thailand. You have single boxes. The beekeepers will standardize colonies across an apiary. So if one is very small, they'll take frames from one to make and put from a stronger colony to make the weaker one stronger. They don't use supers, so instead they take brood frames from the brood box. They extract the honey in the apiary before the honey is capped, so it's quite watery, and the colonies are smaller. So partially because of this way that they standardize the colonies amongst the apiary, but also Tropilaelaps has an impact. It does have an impact on the colony size, and it keeps them small. I mean, I've never seen anybody extract in an apiary like this. And it was just fascinating to see no robbing going on. The trees that you can see in the background are longan trees, and there was a nectar flow on. Just amazing to see. And here he is. He's going to fill up his honey barrel in the back of his pickup truck. But so that's a bit of an example of Thai beekeeping, and what's sort of reasonably typical in large parts of Asia. So Georgia, so a bit of a different ball game in Georgia. So I returned from Georgia about 2 weeks ago. Georgia is a subtropical region, but the climate is comparable to the rest of Europe and North America. I think it gets down to about sort of -2 or -3 in the winter. I think currently it's about 34 degrees at the moment. And plus the colonies are much more similar to what we would be familiar with in the West, particularly in terms of the size. So these are daedent hives, and these are migratory apiaries. So the one on the left has about 350 hives. The one on the right has about 120 hives. And in the region where I was working, so all of the beekeepers will overwinter their colonies very close together in the lowlands near Kutaisi. And then as the season starts and as the season progresses, they migrate their bees up into the Caucasus Mountains, and they follow the nectar flow. And if you see the trees on the sides of the hills there, that's all sort of sweet chestnut and linden, and there's other nectar producing flowers there. And they migrate their bees until eventually sort of at the end of the season, so probably mid-August, they'll reach those high alpine meadows. And this is the area that is the region that is sort of close to Russia. And this is probably where Tropilaelaps cross that land border from Russia into Georgia. And then once the season came to an end, the beekeepers moved their hives back down to the lowlands again. And, this is sort of how Tropilaelaps has spread around Georgia. So last year, Tropilaelaps, it doesn't seem to have been on many beekeepers' radar there. So a few beekeepers were concerned, but I think the majority thought that, it'll be okay. It's a parasitic mite. We'll just treat it as we do for Varroa. That will sort it out. And then like this season is kind of the first real season where they're seeing problems. So this video, if it will play, so this video is from one of those migratory beekeepers. And as you can see, there are lots of mites here. But the thing that concerned me the most when I see that, and this was, colony after colony after colony where I was seeing this beekeeper had treated for Varroa. So it wasn't as if he'd done nothing. He'd used amitraz, he'd used formic acid, he'd caged his queens for several weeks in the summer, and he'd had a fairly consistent regime of Varroa treatment throughout the summer, throughout the winter. It wasn't like he was doing nothing to control the mites. And as I said, I saw this multiple times, varying different levels, but I think every case I saw was a much higher infestation of Tropilaelaps than I'd seen in Thailand and in Asia. But, this is migratory beekeeping. It's of course, you're going to get cross-contamination. You're going to get reinfestation because people are moving hives close to each other, and then they're moving them apart. So that is a problem. However, this is another apiary I visited, which is it was at a convent. It's a closed apiary. The nuns, so they don't collect swarms, they don't migrate their bees, they don't sort of buy in equipment. And they first found, so they had no Tropilaelaps in 2024. And the really good thing about this apiary in this example was that they kept really meticulous records on absolutely everything, like fantastic detail. And they were actively monitoring for Tropilaelaps in 2024. They found no mites in 2024. They caged their queens in mid-October, and they kept their queens caged right the way through the winter, so for 4 months, and they released their queens in mid-February. So the colonies had a 4-month broodless period. When they released the queens in February, they also treated with formic acid treatment. So, by rights, there should be no mites in these colonies at all. I think it was mid-March that they found 2 Tropilaelaps mites, so one in 2 different colonies. And then I was there in June. And again, it was a similar picture to the previous slide where you would uncap the brood and there would just be all of these mites. I'm just going to play a little video. It kind of gives you a bit of a flavour of the apiary there. Right, okay, so diapause, so that's something that sort of gets talked about quite a lot, and I think the potential for mites to overwinter. They are a tropical mite, and they are surviving in these temperate climates. I was in Thailand at the end of March, and while I was there, diapause was something that we wanted to look at as part of our research. Could Tropilaelaps mites enter a state of diapause? Other Laelapidae mites can do this, and the temperatures that I was interested in was so below 10 degrees Celsius. So that is when the external temperature drops below 10 degrees. That's when the bees start to cluster. 12 degrees Celsius is the temperature. So inside the hive, but outside of that cluster. 22 degrees is the temperature at the edge of the cluster, and then 32 degrees is kind of the internal temperature of the cluster. So I had those temperatures sort of picked out in my mind. That's what I wanted to look at. In the picture there, we've got Jeff Wilson. He is the Saskatchewan provincial apiarist. He lives in the middle of Canada. The video at the bottom there is his colonies, which he overwinters outside. So this was in March. So he was in Thailand. His wife took this video. And Jeff said, can we put in a really cold temperature into this experiment as well? So it was currently -14 where Jeff's bees were at home. So we added that in. So we harvested lots of mites. We gave them some pupae so they had something to feed on. And we stored those mites at the different temperatures for 96 hours. So Tropilaelaps mites shouldn't be able to survive for longer than sort of 72 hours, in the conditions that we sort of set them up in. And so if anything survived at 96 hours, it had to be something to do with the temperature. So that's kind of the logic behind the experiment. And there's some sort of pretty kind of shocking and interesting results there. So at -15 and at 2 degrees, a very small percentage of the mites survive. So 1.5%, 1.25%. We were literally taking these samples out of the freezer and defrosting them, and 1 or 2 mites would be alive, which was just fascinating to see. But then bizarrely, there's a picture of this is the mites we put in the pots. Bizarrely, at 12 degrees, nothing survives. So, which, you know, we found really interesting, because I think we perhaps had an idea that, you know, if mites could enter diapause, they might sort of leave the bees and go into the woodwork in the hive or something, and sort of secrete themselves and enter this state of diapause, and it would be approximately 12 degrees there. But no, all of the mites died at 12 degrees. 22 degrees, however, we actually had a higher and longer survival than we did in our control group, which was the natural brood temperature. So that 22 degrees, which is like the outside temperature of the cluster, had actually sort of quite a bit higher survival rates. So really interesting. Need to do more work to kind of work out exactly what's going on there. It was quite a small study, and yeah, we will look at it again in the future. But it goes to show that Tropilaelaps can do these surprising things. They do tend to continually surprise us. Another theory about Tropilaelaps survival, and it gets talked about a lot, and like it concerned with transmission, is can they survive on alternative hosts? So I think Sam Ramsey, for example, he talks about Tropilaelaps surviving on rats. And if you remember the slide on Laelapidae, there are Laelapidae mites that parasitize mammals. So again, this was something that we wanted to look in. Particularly if they can survive on rats, then that's a completely different ball game when you're trying to control their transmission and their spread around the world. So I looked a bit more into what Sam Ramsey described in his talks, and the only reference I could find about Tropilaelaps and rats comes from this scientific paper from 1961. It's the first ever description of Tropilaelaps. It was discovered in the Philippines by Mercedes Delfinado and Edward Baker. Tropilaelaps Mercedesae is called Tropilaelaps Mercedes because Mercedes Delfinado discovered it. They later went on and got married. I don't know for certain, but I think, potentially it's quite romantic that they found love over rats and Tropilaelaps mites and went on to get married. But anyway, the only reference I can find to Tropilaelaps and rats is from this initial description. And the only thing it says in the whole paper is, so they went to the apiary, they found these mites and some dead colonies. And then it says the same mites were taken from field rats nesting near the hives. And to me, this kind of raises a number of questions. So firstly, if you're an entomologist and a beekeeper and you're investigating dead colonies, you find these mites in the colonies, why would you logically then go look at rats in the apiary? I mean, that just seems like a bit of a leap to me. And secondly, Tropilaelaps mites are tiny. They're really hard to find. They're really hard to work with. So how would you even find these Tropilaelaps mites on a rat? So I kind of made the assumption that they were referring to dead rats here. And in Thailand, again, so we looked at Tropilaelaps survival. Could they survive on dead rats? We tried this several times, and we couldn't get them to survive on dead rats. So that's somewhat comforting. Obviously, it wasn't live rats, but it does kind of suggest that perhaps they can't survive on mammals, and that eliminates a transmission risk that potentially we need to be worrying about. So that was something that was kind of reassuring. Still need to work out a way to kind of test their survival on live rats. To be honest, rats kind of scare me a bit, so I'm not massively up for handling them and stuff. So while I was looking for information about alternative hosts, these two, I came across these other pieces of research. So first comes from Serbia. It's from the 1980s. It talks about Tropilaelaps. It was found in an apiary where all of the colonies had died. The researcher went and looked at the bumblebees that were found in the same apiary, and they found that the bumblebees were infested with Tropilaelaps. The bottom picture there is a picture of the actual mites from this paper. To me, I think this is a case of misidentification. I don't think it looks like a Tropilaelaps mite. I think it's potentially another Laelapidae mite. I think the legs are a bit too long, but it's out there. This second paper is from India in 1996. The authors wrote a few papers where they talk about Tropilaelaps infesting carpenter bees. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to sort of find much more details on that, but again, it's just, sort of raises a slight alarm bell that potentially they might be able to survive on these different bee species. And to be honest, we don't really know if they can or they can't. Hopefully they can't. And, it'd be nice to kind of establish that and prove that. And it would be one less thing to worry about. Tropilaelaps transmission. Last year did some work, and we wanted to know what could Tropilaelaps survive on? How could it be transmitted to the UK? So we wanted to know, could Tropilaelaps survive on things like bee imports, used beekeeping equipment, honeycomb, dried pollen, and could they survive for long enough on those commodities to be able to reach the UK and potentially get into a beehive and reproduce. We also have like boats and shipping containers that arrive in the UK with wild honeybee colonies on, so that also poses a transmission risk. So sort of old honeybee comb, we wanted to look at that as well. Now, I'm not going to go into this slide in a massive amount of detail. We've written a paper on it. If you follow the QR code, you can read all of the information about it there. But what we did find, and just sort of very briefly, I'll go into some of the results. So the Tropilaelaps mites couldn't survive for longer than 48 hours on honeycomb, on the dried pollen. We also tried bee suit fabric because we thought, potentially we don't want to bring Tropilaelaps back on our clothing, but they couldn't survive for longer than 48 hours on any of those things. We actually did the study over 2 years, which is why it's kind of broken down like that. 2024, we looked at Apis Dorsata, so their natural hosts. It was really interesting because if you introduce the Tropilaelaps mites to the Apis Dorsata, they got really annoyed. There was a lot of alarm pheromone, like they were seriously annoyed. They all started grooming themselves. So we didn't actually sort of see any damage ourselves, but other researchers that have done something similar, when they've looked at the mites, the Dorsata have like bitten their legs off and bitten them in half. So this co-evolution between Apis Dorsata and Tropilaelaps, Apis Dorsata have these mechanisms to deal with Tropilaelaps, and they don't like it if you put Tropilaelaps on them. But we also put Tropilaelaps on Western honeybees, so quite young Western honeybees to kind of mimic those nurse bees that you might get in a queen cage as attendants. And quite a large proportion of them died quite quickly. So I think it was about 85% died quite quickly. But that small percentage that managed to survive, so the 15%, went on to live for around 5 days. And this is concerning because in theory, in a queen cage, you've got some attendants. 5 days is potentially long enough for them to reach the UK. UK, it's kind of borderline there. But the most concerning results were, we also tested Tropilaelaps survival on dead honeybees and dead brood. So if you had some used beekeeping equipment, if you had a package of bees that had some dead bees in the bottom, if you had a queen import and some of the attendants were dead, could the Tropilaelaps mites survive on those? And we had the mites surviving for up to 8 and 9 days on those 2 different matrices. So that was concerning because when it comes to used beekeeping equipment being brought into the UK, packages, queen imports, it does potentially pose a threat, and they can potentially be transmitted. So UK imports. So is Tropilaelaps a threat to UK beekeeping? Well, Georgia, it's a 5-hour flight away. It is right over the other side of Europe, but how likely is it that it can reach the UK? Well, it will naturally, gradually transition and be transmitted across Europe. There are land borders. I think that's just a fact of nature, and I feel very sorry for the European beekeepers that have those land borders. It's very hard to kind of guess, how long that will take. But I've spoken to lots of Tropilaelaps researchers, and they all sort of say between 5 and 10 years of that sort of land spread across Europe to reach the UK. However, so this map in the red areas, it shows where Tropilaelaps were confirmed in 2024. Anecdotally, beekeepers have been reporting the issue there for probably about 3 years prior to it being confirmed. Those red areas are bordered by 2 of the largest beekeeping countries in the world behind China. So Turkey has 6.6 million registered colonies. Every year, beekeepers migrate their colonies from east to west and then back again for honey production. So I spent some time right on that sort of southern border of Georgia, getting sort of quite close to Turkey. Tropilaelaps was there. It's just a line on a map. The mites don't care what is Georgia, what is Turkey. Similarly, the bees don't care. So you will have that migratory beekeeping. The bees will mix, Tropilaelaps will spread. Again, so Ukraine, I think obviously they've got the war going on, so that's had an impact on beekeeping. But the statistics I could find, so in 2020 there were 2.3 million registered colonies. That's thought to be around half the actual number of colonies that are in Ukraine. Ukraine has a massive tradition of beekeeping, migratory beekeeping. last year, and this is, so the numbers in red there show the number of queens that we directly imported from Ukraine, Romania, and Greece. And these numbers don't reflect the queens or package bees that entered the UK via Southern Ireland before they were moved to Northern Ireland and then on to mainland UK. So Malta is very concerning. So last year we imported 2,350 queens from there. I think in 2022 we imported 8,500 queens from Malta, and pre-Brexit the number of queens coming in from there was around 4 times as much as that. And that market for queens and bees hasn't gone away. It's just now sort of coming through that Southern Ireland, Northern Ireland route, and it's, you know, it is a concern and it is an issue. The concern about Malta is that the red dwarf honeybee, Apis Melifera, was detected in Malta in 2024. Potentially, you know, it could be established there. Apis Melifera can support Tropilaelaps, and you know it's a concern. We're importing lots of queens from there. I have put a QR code up in the top right hand corner, so that takes you to BeeBase, which is the National Bee Unit website, and it is their live. I can't remember the exact name of it. Live import tracker or live queen imports. Anyway, if you follow that QR code, there is a table there. In the top right hand corner of that table, there's a little drop down menu, and you can change the year and you can see what gets imported from where and whether it's inspected or not. And the Ukrainian queens last year and so far this year haven't been inspected, and you know, it is concerning. And I think the thing is also, Ukraine, with the current political situation there, they have bigger concerns than Tropilaelaps. So in terms of monitoring, you know, it's not going to be high up on their list of priorities. And the way we keep bees, you know, we are notorious for spreading pests and diseases around. You know, it's us, the beekeepers, that are doing it. So what can you do? Well, firstly, if you're buying bees, you need to think about where you're buying them from. So lots of people, I've seen lots of stuff on social media recently that you know, we should ban all imports, and you know, whatever your opinion is on imports, the question has to be asked is, why are we importing all of these queens? There is a market there for them. So these queen importers would not import queens if they didn't know that they were going to be sold, because no queen importer wants to spend however much on a queen import and then have half of it not sell, and then they've effectively got to chuck them in the bin. So beekeepers need to take responsibility, and they need to sort of show due diligence and ask questions about, where do these queens come from? So if you are buying a queen, did that queen originate in the UK? Has it spent all of its life in the UK? Was it UK reared, or was it produced somewhere else and has then been transported? Same, you know, if you're buying nukes early in the season, where have those bees come from? Are they overwintered colonies, or have they come from somewhere else? And, you know, the question of imports, like, it will just polarize opinion and people will argue about it. And now is not the time for everybody to be arguing about, you know, what we need to focus on is protecting our country from Tropilaelaps. And, you know, we live on an island, we have these sea borders. The rest of Europe don't have that option. They only have land borders. The beekeepers, you know, you need to educate yourself, and you need to be a bit sort of better informed when you make these decisions. And when you go online and you buy queens and you buy bees, where do they come from? You need to start asking that question, because trust me, you don't want to be the person that imports Tropilaelaps. And also educate yourself about Tropilaelaps. So many beekeepers never even heard of it. At the end of this presentation, there's details of my website. All of the videos you see on here, the life cycle diagrams, the maps and that, it's all on the website. If you want to download it and use it for your own presentations, feel free to do so. This year, we've also worked on a project with educational videos, and roughly one a month, we're releasing a video. So they cover how to monitor for Tropilaelaps, but also biology, behavior, Asian beekeeping, you know, like really the sort of whole kind of broad spectrum of what Tropilaelaps does, how it reproduces. And they are on the social media and on the website. Like I said, they come out one a month. But please also monitor your colonies for Tropilaelaps. When Varroa mites were discovered in the UK, it was a local beekeepers association. I think it was Torbay or Torquay Beekeepers Association. They were carrying out training with their members one day. They were teaching their members how to look for Varroa. Imagine their surprise when they actually found Varroa mites. But when they did, and when everybody started looking for Varroa, it was actually found in 3 separate locations around the UK. And it will be a beekeeper that finds Tropilaelaps mites. So you need to be able to identify it. You need to know how to monitor for it in a colony, and then what to do once you find it. And so again, quickly, the first project I did on Tropilaelaps was how to monitor for Tropilaelaps as a bee inspector, so a statutory pest inspection. And we developed these techniques. And so we tried all of these techniques. Some of them worked very well. Some of them weren't very effective at all. If you want to read about it, there's the QR code there. You can. This year, we focused more on sort of adapting these techniques so that beekeepers can use them and so that beekeepers can proactively monitor for Tropilaelaps. So I'll quickly go through them because, like I said, there's videos on the website. First technique is brood uncapping. It's by far the most effective technique. Ideally, you want to uncap 100 cells, and you use some tweezers, carefully remove the capping, and pull out the brood. But it is quite a time-consuming method. You can see it takes a bit of time to pull out the brood. You don't want to damage it, because if you damage the brood, any of that exudate that comes out of the pupae, it camouflages the mites and it makes it hard to see them. So it does obviously kill that bit of brood. It is very time-consuming. Another method of brood uncapping, so this was developed in Georgia, and it's rapid brood decapping, and it uses wax depilation hair removal strips. You can see Paul putting one on a frame of brood there, and you quickly pull it off, which you will do in a second, and you'll see that when he removes this, the mites just emerge from the cell. So it's very quick, it's very simple to do. This is Thailand. You can see that the level of infestation is much lower. There's literally just 2 mites there. We probably would have considered this a sort of medium level of infestation in a colony. What you saw in the video earlier on in the presentation was that same rapid brood decapping technique, and all of the mites that came out, I'm collecting them there for something. So it's much quicker, it's much easier to do. The brood doesn't get damaged. So if you return this frame to the colony, the bees will either recap it, or the pupae will continue to pupate and they will continue to emerge as adult bees. And one thing you do need to be a little bit careful of is the ambient temperature. So if it's very hot, like in Thailand, the strips can get too hot and they can become too sticky. Similarly, if it's too cold, they're not quite sticky enough. So it's best to kind of warm them between your hands if you're going to do this technique. So another simple technique that people can use is an icing sugar roll of adult bees. So it's a half-cup scoop of bees into a container, add some icing sugar, you roll the bees in the icing sugar, and because the bees are covered in sugar, they groom themselves, so that dislodges phoretic mites, and also the sugar clogs the mites up themselves. So when you shake the sugar sample, all of the mites get dislodged, and you can see the brown mites in that sugar sample. We also tried an alcohol wash and CO2 monitoring. So those techniques weren't effective for Tropilaelaps. I think they're just too small. So in the alcohol, they don't get washed off the bees. They don't get washed out of that clump of dead bees. Similarly with CO2, there's nothing to actually remove the mites from the bees. So, but icing sugar was effective, and it's quick and easy and simple to do. It doesn't kill anything. You can return the bees to the colony at the end. So the bump method, I'm not a particular fan of the comb bump method, but it's quite popular in the United States for Tropilaelaps detection. So I thought better sort of cover it here. You take a brood frame, you shake all of the bees off that brood frame, and then you bump it, or you bump the wooden edges of the brood frame on a white tray, and it dislodges any phoretic mites that are on the tray. But the kind of downside to this is if your combs have a lot of honey in them, or if the wax is particularly soft, or you have unwired combs, it can damage the combs. It does also sort of kill the brood that you bump, because you're banging the frame on a tray. So this shows a frame 24 hours after it, and you can see that sort of sealed brood, the bees have started, the brood has died, and then the bees have started to sort of chew it up and cannibalize it, and you will see dead brood on the floor of your hive. But it does detect Tropilaelaps mites, so if you want to detect them, you can do it in that way. Finally, sticky floor inserts. So you can use sticky floor inserts to monitor for Tropilaelaps mites. If you've got an open mesh floor, you can use either a commercially available sticky insert, or you can make your own. You can laminate a sheet of card, or if you've got Corex, you can smear it with vegetable oil or Vaseline. Put this on your open mesh floor insert. Ideally, you want to return sort of 24 hours later and remove it, because the more debris the floor collects, the harder it is to see the mites, because you're looking for tiny brown dots in amongst thousands of tiny brown dots. And again, this is quite time consuming. You can see the guys there spent a lot of time. You need magnification, you need a light, but you can detect Tropilaelaps in this way. But it is time consuming. It does take some time. And whatever technique you do, doesn't really matter, just as long as you're doing something to try and detect Tropilaelaps. Like I said, it will probably be a beekeeper that detects it, and the sooner we can detect it, then potentially we might have a chance of eradicating it. But if nobody's looking for it, then, well, nobody's looking for it. And finally, I'm going to cover treatments. So these photos were taken in Thailand and in Asia. So technically, beekeepers in Asia, they shouldn't really use chemical treatments while the colonies are collecting honey. And all of the beekeepers I've spoken to, they always get a bit cagey when you start bringing up treatments and what they use and what they do. I've been to Thailand several different times now, and at different times throughout the year, and I've always seen treatments in all of the hives all the time. So they seem to just perpetually treat, and there is this wide array of treatments available. So in this main photo here, all of these are amitraz, fluvalinate or flumethrin based. The only one that isn't is this formic acid based treatment there. The can that you can see, so that's an amitraz spray. You spray it on the floor of your hive. Costs about £7. Treats 200 colonies apparently. The beekeeper that I spoke to thought it was absolutely fantastic. He loved it. The other treatments are about £3, and you can treat sort of 20 to 50 colonies. So all of those treatments have been developed with honeybees in mind. However, a large proportion of beekeepers, they also will take household treatment. So this is a dog flea treatment, and they will water this down and they will spray this in their hives to treat for Tropilaelaps. I met another beekeeper that had used a cattle tick treatment and had actually sort of killed quite a lot of his hives. So that's kind of gives you an overview of what's going on in Thailand. But like I said, to manage Tropilaelaps, there is this sort of culture of just perpetual chemical treatment all of the time. And these, I haven't really sort of got much to say about these. So these are the treatments that were available in Georgia. I particularly like Varroa. I like the box on that. But again, sort of widely available. The beekeepers there are sort of treating fairly regularly for Varroa, seem to be sort of quite cheaply priced. But in terms of treatments and what you can do potentially, so as I said earlier on, one of the things we looked at was oxalic acid sublimation. Other researchers have looked at oxalic acid mixed with glycerine and placed on pads within the brood, or an oxalic acid dribble and like a thymol mixture put into syrup, and then they've dribbled that between the seams of the bees. So the pads and the dribble method didn't seem to be terribly effective. But like I said, we tried oxalic acid sublimation. We used 3 grams of oxalic acid every 5 days for 25 days. And we saw, compared to the non-treatment group, we saw an 87% reduction in brood reinfestation and phoretic mites. But you can see from this graph there, so the orange is the untreated colonies and the blue is the treated colonies. While this is sort of 87% less than the non-treated colonies, we only managed to really hold the Tropilaelaps population at a steady level. We didn't actually manage to eradicate it. So it was somewhat effective, but not great. If anybody, so that was in Asia. what about in Georgia? What are they doing there? If anybody sort of saw my WBK talk a few weeks ago, you know, I was sort of pretty pessimistic and pretty despondent. You know, when I returned from Georgia, I was just thinking, like, blimey, what are we going to do? Because the beekeepers there, they've been treating for mites, you know, and the Tropilaelaps situation was just terrible. However, there is like a little tiny glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. I think it's been about 3 weeks since I got back, and Irakli, who is one of the researchers who's based in Georgia, who I've been working with, he continued the work, and one of the things that he's been looking at is what we're calling a formic acid shock treatment, and it's very early days yet, but he is seeing promising results from that. But I don't want anybody to go away from this talk and think, oh, it will be okay. You know, Maggie said that formic acid works, so we don't need to worry about Tropilaelaps. That's not what I'm saying. You know, we can't be complacent. What I'm saying is that with a combination of sort of queen trapping and other biotechnical techniques in combination with something like formic acid, then potentially Tropilaelaps is going to be manageable, and it's not quite as such a depressing situation as I thought it was when I initially got back from Thailand. But this treatment regime and this management regime is going to involve a lot of work. So I think, you know, realistically, it will require beekeepers to cage their queens over the winter. So what the nuns were doing at the convent, caging the queens in mid-October and then releasing them in mid-February, treating with formic acid, then potentially caging again sort of later on in the season and treating again. And to do all of that, you know, you have to be able to find your queens in your colonies. You have to be able to catch the queens and handle them and cage them. You know, and similarly, formic acid isn't free. You know, there's going to be a monetary and a labour cost to all of this. You can't be wearing big leather gloves and sort of picking up your queens. If you have lots of colonies and you're a commercial beekeeper, potentially it's going to take you a lot of time to manage Tropilaelaps. But it does seem like there is something that we can do, and it's not quite as bleak as I thought it potentially might be. Thank you for listening. I just got a few thank yous before we can get to the questions. Hope you found this interesting. I think if you take anything away from this is to just be prepared and be aware and don't be complacent about it. You know, I don't want to be the harbinger of doom, but given the way that we keep bees, you know, our track record as beekeepers, we spread every pest and disease around. Global trade is increasing. Climate change makes the climate more suitable for Tropilaelaps. You know, there are shipping containers, there are boats. You know, we really need to be on the ball. And I think we are at a kind of unique point in time now where we have this window of a few years to get our acts together and to do something. We don't want to be sitting there and kind of looking back like 5, 6, 7 years in the future and going like, oh, what, you know, why didn't we do something? Now is the time to act, because, you know, Tropilaelaps is that far away. As I said, so I'll put the website details up again at the end. There's the series of films there that you can watch. There's information leaflets on there. All of the little videos that you see in this are available on there. If you want something that's not on the website, just send me an email. I'll quite happily share stuff with you. And finally, just to give, so I have to thank the team that I work with. So apart from the initial project where we were doing the detection techniques for the National Bee Unit, none of this work has been supported by the UK government. We've had to fundraise for everything sort of since then. So left to right, top to bottom, I want to thank Jeff Wilson. He's the Saskatchewan Provincial Apiarist and the Saskatchewan Bee Development Commission who funded Jeff coming out. Avril Earle, Kevin Pope, Dr. Badri Chutong, so she's also known as Bomb. She gives us lab space in Chiang Mai. She lets us use her apiary at the university and has just been tremendously helpful. Adam Agiros, George Tong, Paul Davies, finally Dan Etheridge. It was Dan and I that started this work 3 years ago. It started with a conversation about Tropilaelaps detection. It kind of put us on this path. Everyone in these photos, you know, they all donate their time. We don't get paid for this. It's these people that make the projects a success. We all have families. We all have proper jobs. So a big thank you to them. Again, Thank you to the beekeepers of Georgia. I have to give a massive thank you to Irakli, Alex and Marin. I'm incredibly fortunate that I've had this opportunity to work with them. And we have just written a book together on Tropilaelaps. It will come out in October. The book basically covers everything that I've sort of just covered in this presentation. So biology, behavior, symptoms, transmission. But I think the thing that will be most useful to beekeepers are the chapters on Tropilaelaps detection. So it covers all of those detection techniques that I just told you about in a lot more detail. There are QR codes with videos on those techniques, but also there is a whole section on Tropilaelaps control. And we've taken our expertise as beekeepers, which I think combined is probably over 100 years of beekeeping experience. Between us, we've worked with honeybees probably on every continent in the world. Alex has experience of Tropilaelaps in China. I've worked with them in Thailand, Irakli in Georgia. Marin has a huge amount of experience in Varroa and parasitism. The control methods we described, they're predominantly biotechnical, but we also look at like how Tropilaelaps and Varroa interact within a colony. We look at like what's happening on an apiary scale. So hopefully, if you're looking for a Christmas present, you might give this one a bit of a shot. And the biggest thank you has to go to everybody that has supported these projects financially, especially bee disease insurance. None of this work would have happened without bee disease insurance. Just thank you for your support. It's been incredible. Thank you to Bibber, Wax Chandlers, Sherborne and Dorset Beekeepers Association. So they've all donated separate bits and pieces. So like the filming project and equipment that we've needed. So big thank you to them as well. And right, yeah, that's me done.
Maggie, what can I say? Absolutely fantastic presentation. I have to say, for me personally, the graphics were brilliant. And I hope everyone's got the job. First of all, have a drink and have a breath, because I know you must be lacking oxygen. I hope I've just seen a lot of people's comments. We're up to 170, 180 people viewing the whole time. That's brilliant.
Oh wow. Hi, everybody.
And what I'm going to go is when you're ready, we're just going to ask you a few questions. I think you've answered a lot of the questions for it, but I just want to kind of reiterate some of the important facts to beekeepers in the UK. The first one of the ones I'm interested in myself, because I find this quite fascinating, is if you're happy to answer. First of all, VSH, does that have an effect on Tropilaelaps or any mites? Well, obviously we know it does affect some Varroa and it does some action. What's the news on that?
So in terms of Varroa sort of sensitivity and hygiene, so in Asia, VSH isn't really a thing. Like I said, the beekeepers predominantly just treat and treat and treat, and I think they have to control the Tropilaelaps, because you saw in those colonies where we had the control group that we treated with oxalic acid, and then we had the other group where we had no treatment. If we didn't treat for 3 weeks, the colony was dead a week later. So within a month you've lost your colony. No bee can develop any sort of hygienic behavior or sensitivity if you're not like proactively managing it. Varroa is a different story. You'll have your apiary. You generally, a Varroa infestation would take, an average colony, it would take probably like 3 seasons to kill the colony. But on an apiary level, as a queen breeder, you can go, right, those colonies are really good and they're showing sort of really good Varroa sensitive behaviors. Those ones are a bit rubbish. I'll breed from the good ones. And you've got 3 seasons to kind of play and raise drones and, assess things, and you can share stuff with your friends. It's not the case with Tropilaelaps, unfortunately. You haven't got the time.
Yeah. And that also brings me to treatment-free. There is no treatment-free possibilities, is there?
I can't envisage a way that people can be treatment-free. I think the biotechnical, so the creating broodless periods, it does seem to work. And I think what shocked me most initially in Georgia was, so if you take the nuns in the convent, it's quite an isolated apiary. They weren't migrating bees around, and they didn't have any Tropilaelaps in 2024. They had found 2 mites, beginning middle of March, and I was there in June, so 3 months later, and they had 86 colonies in the apiary, and I think it was in pretty much every colony. And those mites can only have come in on drifting bees, robber bees, you know, and
right. Yeah.
If I can be the best beekeeper in the world, and I can treat my colonies, and I can use biotechnical methods, and I can use you know, formic acid or other chemicals, and I can keep my Tropilaelaps levels low. But if all of my neighbours aren't doing the same, we're just going to all reinfest each other. So it's that's the other thing that's concerning about Tropilaelaps, is it's not just on an individual apiary or individual beekeeper scale, it's on a geographic scale. And at an association level, people are going to have to go, right, it's the 15th of October, we're all caging our queens, and everybody has to do it, because if one person doesn't, then potentially that's going to be the one person that reinfests everybody else. And I don't know, like, certainly like the beekeepers associations I've come across, they tend to bicker quite a lot, and there's lots of arguments, and like, we can't do that.
I don't think we do. No, I mean, that's a very interesting point, and trying to choreograph or coordinate everyone to do that at the same time would be a big challenge in itself. You know, it's a bit like people to get to test for mites in the first place. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who don't even check for mites because they go, well, I know I've got them.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm just kind of blown away by the I honestly say, again, the clarity of that presentation was brilliant, because the graphics at the start, it really explained and gives everyone a base view and a base understanding of, because you need underpinning knowledge to understand a problem. And that personified it perfectly. So thanks ever so much. That was absolutely brilliant. So sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, you know, I think part of the new reality that, you know, certainly beekeepers in Georgia are facing at the moment is it's not just Tropilaelaps, it's Tropilaelaps and Varroa together. And, you know, that has implications in the way that they sort of interact on a colony level and on an apiary level. And, you know, whereas you might have been able to, you know, we've all gotten pretty good at managing our Varroa treatments to coincide with honey flows, and, you know, so that the honey doesn't get contaminated, and that Tropilaelaps will completely change that schedule. And how do you manage both mites successfully within a colony? So that's kind of another complication that gets added into the mix as well. But you know, you look at the biology in that, you do kind of have to have that understanding of where they've come from, and Apis dorsata has these broodless periods. Nobody really knows what Tropilaelaps does then, but they're a different beast to Varroa. You can't just go, oh, it's like Varroa. It's not. And that, you know, that was kind of my point.
Yeah, the problem is we've all spent so long not becoming Varroa experts, becoming, I would say, bad managers of Varroa, because that's how I feel I am, because I can never seem to get it right. But now this has come along, and like, well, one of the questions that comes out from the Varroa question is, first we used to have tracheal mites, and I don't remember it. Then when we started treating mites, we had no tracheal mites, but we had Varroa mites. And now, is it possible now that we're going to see a lot less Varroa mites, because we're treating, we may be treating Tropilaelaps mites, so all the sub pests before will disappear because the high level of treatment is so intense.
Yeah. So one of the videos there. So after the slide with the map, there's a video where there's a larvae, and it's got Varroa, a couple of Varroa mites on it, and I think 3 Tropilaelaps mites on it. And in that video, the Tropilaelaps mites are jumping on the Varroa mites, and we see this a lot. And I sort of liken it to when you have like a bird of prey and you have crows that kind of mob that bird of prey. They don't actually do any harm to the Varroa mite. They just bug it and they just annoy it. And when you go through it, so those Varroa mites, when we see them in Thailand, we collect them because they're actually quite rare. And I suspect that it's something to do with the Tropilaelaps kind of hamper them from reproducing, because they're just harassing them all the time and they're just bothering them. And if the Varroa mite goes into a cell to reproduce and there's a Tropilaelaps mite in there, it's got this Tropilaelaps mite just at it, and then it tries to go to the next cell and tries to go to the next cell. So certainly in Thailand, you see very low levels of Varroa, very high levels of Tropilaelaps. Occasionally you'll get a colony that has like quite a lot of Varroa in, and it'll have that sort of lower Tropilaelaps level. So there does seem to be this kind of crossover between the two.
Yeah. Okay. And another question that came up: what level of Western honeybee is there in Asia at the moment? Is it non-existent, or is there a few Apis mellifera there, or?
So Apis mellifera is widespread throughout Asia. So China, India, Thailand, Cambodia. They were imported in, like I said, the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And so before that, prior to that, beekeepers kept the Asian honeybee Apis cerana. Apis cerana has evolved with Varroa mites, and because of that, the colonies are very small. They're very swarmy. They abscond a lot. So in terms of like beekeeping, they're a bit of a nightmare. You don't really get much of a honey crop from them. They're constantly swarming. The Western honeybee was introduced, and this was fantastic. Bigger colonies, more productive, less swarmy. Of course, then Varroa and Tropilaelaps jump species onto them. But the kind of bee of choice in Asia is the Western honeybee Apis mellifera. So they're widespread right from the coast of China and Cambodia right the way across, and that's why Tropilaelaps is spread. There's this unbroken band of Western honeybees from east to west.
And obviously that's a question was a bit stupid to ask, but my point was, is every colony that's there has to be managed now? Absolutely,
no, if the beekeepers don't treat for Tropilaelaps, the colonies die, and they say about 3 months, 4 months if you ask them. And because we wanted to do the research, we wanted colonies with high mite levels in. So I would be sort of emailing back and forth and WhatsApping with the beekeepers going, right, we're turning up on this date. We want 20 colonies. We want 40 colonies. Please, can you not treat from this date? And they always treated. And it was really, I was like, damn it, there's treatments in the colonies. But I suspect that the Thai beekeepers were just going, these crazy Westerners. Like she keeps on asking me not to treat the colonies. The colonies will be dead if we don't treat them. So I think they were sort of almost intervening on my behalf. And the first time that we saw that non-treatment colony, it was like, oh right, that there the brood's dead, the bees are dying, the colony just dwindled away in the space of a few weeks, and it was just like, oh right, okay, that's why they continually treat, and that's why they treat when we ask them not to.
Well, that was fascinating to see the extraction process, and obviously there was no robbing going on, and I'm thinking, I should try that in my apiary. I'd last at least 6 seconds. Do you know what I mean? It's I would like you, if you can, to just talk a little bit about how you found Georgian beekeepers and their level of competence, because I want people to understand that it's a really important thing that we're dealing with good beekeepers here, aren't we? That are exactly the same level as we are in the UK. We're all competent and well.
Yeah, I mean, I was so impressed by the Georgian beekeepers. So I think that the initial thing that kind of surprised me was the number of hives in the apiary. So I think the smallest apiary I went to had about 60 colonies in. And there was enough forage to support that. So you've got 60 Daden colonies. That's a lot of bees, and there's a lot of forage coming in to support that. But they are so knowledgeable. And I've kept bees for 20 years. I worked for the National Bee for 10 years. I've handled a lot of bees in my day. I felt, like I was the dumb kid in the class in terms of they just understand it, the culture of beekeeping there. They really know their stuff. And particularly with the, things like the queen caging from mid-October through to mid-February, that's not something that I've ever really come across in the UK. Techniques such as queen ringing, so that's where you can place like a rubber band on the queen's abdomen. It stops her from laying, and that kind of so if you put a queen in a cage over the winter, you run the risk that the cluster of bees will move away from that queen, and potentially she'll get chilled. If you ring the queen, she can move around within the colony, and she doesn't get isolated. But you have to be confident in how you've got to pick the queen up off the frame and then attach this very small rubber ring onto her abdomen. It's not a simple thing to do, but that's like fairly common practice over there. And I was very impressed by the scale of beekeeping, like the honey houses they had set up. The apiaries, everything was just like really good. They clearly know their stuff. So this Tropilaelaps problem is not anything to do with the standard of beekeeping there. It's very good.
What is their government's kind of stance on it? Are they euthanizing colonies like perhaps ours would? I'm just bringing in terms of like the Australian model when Varroa came in, and are they accepting now that it's there and there's nothing they can do about it, or how does it work for them?
I don't think the government has been terribly proactive. So, so one of the kind of like World Animal Health Organization's things is that each country should have a rapid pest risk assessment for Tropilaelaps. And I believe that the Georgian one hasn't been updated, so it doesn't actually say that Tropilaelaps is in the country. So they haven't started euthanizing colonies, and the beekeepers aren't getting support, certainly from the government side of it. I mean, so Irakli, the work that he does is, so he's a lecturer at Tbilisi University. He's doing all of this in addition, because he's a beekeeper, because he's concerned about it, the same way that Dan and myself and Paul and George, we've all got day jobs and we're all doing this because, well, one, because we love beekeeping, but two, because we're concerned. And yeah, so in Georgia, there's not a lot of support, there's no compensation. And in terms of, I think what upset me the most was that the beekeepers are losing colonies there, and they're clearly upset, but there was no, like, we couldn't give them solutions. We couldn't sort of say, do this and this and this and this will help, because just the understanding hasn't kind of evolved to that point yet. But we need to get there, and we need to sort of help these people, because they're facing big financial losses. And I think if you are a commercial beekeeper, or if your money and your sort of income is any way related to beekeeping, whether that's selling beekeeping equipment, queens, honey production, pollination, whatever it is, I would be very concerned right now, and I would be strategizing and going, okay, potentially this might turn up in the next couple of years. What can I do to pay my mortgage and feed my children? And I'm not trying to sort of be dramatic. It really is that serious. It will kill a lot of colonies. And if you're a hobbyist, it will be very sad and it will be very unfortunate. But from the commercial point of view, this is how people, it's people's livelihoods. And we have now is the time. We have this window of time to like plan and to do things, and to, as a group together, like come up with some sort of solutions to these things.
Yeah, I would totally agree, but we have got a small window. However, I've just invested in a new honey house. I want to have 10 years, 15, 20 years beekeeping ahead of me. And I'm in Europe, North Britain. I'm right on the tip of the other side. Have you any personal ideas? You mentioned before 3 to 5 years, maybe from natural movement, on how long it's going to take to get into Northern Europe?
I mean, it is a bit of a sort of how long is a piece of string. I think that sort of, I say sort of 5 to 10 years. If you, that's kind of based on the spread of Varroa and the time it took Varroa to spread, and then you kind of add into that equation the fact that there is more transmission, there are more beekeepers, climate change. So in terms of natural spread, say 7 years ish. But there's nothing to say that tomorrow somebody won't, potentially illegally bring in some bees, bring in some equipment, a legal queen import, a package.
This is another question. This is another big question. Is if you could say if you could write a recommendation now, what would you ideally recommend? I'm not saying let's have a ban. I think a ban would make things extremely difficult for everybody, because I don't think we've got a bit of a break, like we said. Would you suggest obviously having better biocontrol at the source of the queens and entry into the UK, or entry into well, the thing is, the other problem is there's no gates in Europe. Europe is free, which is the wonderful thing, but it's just not good for us, for beekeepers.
I mean, I think in the UK, we live on an island, and we don't have those land borders. And whatever you think of the UK government and DEFRA and the National Bee Unit, there are systems in place. So there is the Healthy Bees Plan, which is like a big sort of policy document about how we manage our bees, and like the legislation that goes behind it. And there is the Bee Health Advisory Forum, and on that Bee Health Advisory Forum sits the BBKA, the WBK, so British Beekeepers Association, Welsh Beekeepers Association, Bee Farmers Association, Veterinary Medicines Directorate, There's probably a load more, but all of the big players in the UK beekeeping industry sit on that board, and they meet regularly. And if whatever your views are, you have to make your views known to the BBKA, the WBKA, Bee Farmers Association, because they are the ones that kind of have the power and the potential to sort of campaign for they have to be your voice. And there's this process of they go to the Bee Health Advisory Forum, they meet with the National Bee Unit, they meet with DEFRA Bee Health Policy. It's the civil service is probably going to be quite a slow process. So let's get on with it, and let's start. If you feel strongly about this, then do something.
Would you say then it's really important that I'm not saying we should badger our governments, but if we put that little bit of pressure on, I mean, obviously that's what you just said. Yes, it's important we meet and then we move on from there. But what I was getting at was, for example, could you say what level of inspections are happening now with queens that are coming in? Is that sufficient to monitor?
I mean, I do have concerns about the page with the map there, and it had the QR code up in the top corner of that. So like I said, that takes you to the National Bee Unit. I think it's like the live import tracker or something like that. So you can, anybody can go and see how many queens were imported in 2024, which countries they were imported from, and whether they were inspected or not. So that's publicly open data. I think, like I said earlier, there is a market for these queens, so queen importers would not be importing queens if they didn't know that they could sell them. So beekeepers have to take responsibility. We have to look at the way we keep bees, and I think when I started keeping bees, I was taught to be self-sufficient in queens, and I'm not a big scale beekeeper. I've sort of 20, 25 colonies, sort of toy town compared to something like Irakli and Alex and the rest of them. But part of the joy that I took in beekeeping was learning that craft and being self-sufficient in queens and going, right, okay, I've bred these ones. Are they any good? Some of them were terrible. Some of them were horrible. I kept records on it. And I really enjoyed that process of she's a nice sort of mother queen. I'll breed from her next year. If you can just go on the internet and just, order a queen and it arrives the next day, that takes something away from the craft, and it doesn't make you a better beekeeper. It's if you want to beekeep, then learn the skills and pass those skills on to other people and share them. And then perhaps we wouldn't be so reliant on queen imports. And if that market dries up, then they won't be coming into the country. But if you use that QR code, you can see what's coming in. You can see the level of inspections on there.
I would just like to reiterate that point, because I from the people I've spoken to, unofficially, they think there's only something like 20 or 30% hatch queens are actually inspected at this point. Because I think that probably the bee inspectors probably know that, yes, we've got Varroa, they've got Varroa, so what? As long as they're coming from a place that's clean of small hive beetle, they're probably not going to inspect. But now we need to put things into place because obviously all the importers are not going to want to have that feather in their cap that says I brought Tropilaelaps into the UK or moved it through Europe, because all it needs. I mean, the other thing I wanted to discuss was people in America have been saying, well, how long do you think it will take to get here? My answer to that will be, it only needs someone moved from bees from Italy to Canada, and it happens in packages, and then they don't know what it is, and then those get moved somewhere else, and before you know it, this could happen in 6 months to a year. This is the frightening thing people have got to realize is, as you said, so first of all, to me, there's two things that are really important just to lead with this: that if you get an infection, the Tropilaelaps will damage the brood first case, and then they will give viruses to the emerging bees that are left. So that is the key to probably why they collapse so quickly.
Yes, it's a whole combination of so there are more Tropilaelaps mites than so if you compare it to Varroa, there are more mites, so there are more mites feeding on the brood. The way they feed is different. So Varroa have these piercing mouth parts. They make very neat wounds. They only make 1 or 2 wounds when they feed, and they all sort of feed communally. Tropilaelaps, so in some of my earlier presentations, I have a slide. There's a paper by Lila de Guzman where she stains the larvae, and you can see all of these wounds on the bees, and she then sort of follows those bees, and you can see the deformities when they emerge out. So just the physical damage of feeding. The Tropilaelaps tear the brood when they feed, and if the brood doesn't die and it goes on to emerge as an adult bee, like I said, it will have deformed feet, deformed antennae. If your antennae don't work and you're a bee, then you're not going to be able to navigate and things like that. So that it shortens the bee's life. And it and that weakens the colony. Then add in the viruses and the complexity of these different strains of virus that Tropilaelaps can transmit. There's Chinese research which suggests that they can transmit things like CBPV and Chinese sackbrood virus, which so Varroa doesn't transmit CBPV. I don't really like what would that even look like if you add Tropilaelaps into the mix. Chronic bee paralysis virus is terrible. George has just sort of had it in some of his bees, and he lost a load of bees to it. Add in Tropilaelaps vectoring it, then I dread to think. So
I wasn't going to ask you to go through the presentation again. I was just, for me, picking out a few of those really important things, because I want people to go back, because the presentation, I said this is the third time, was so good now that we'll be able to go back into it and really pick the bones out for ourselves and go, wow, because there's some things that I've looked at in the last week. I've been going on to Phira Science's site just for my own because I wanted to have some good questions for you but you've answered them. To be honest, you've answered them all, and I think we're going to wrap this up in a minute. But there's one thing I wanted to ask more, was the possibility of, if we get an infestation you mentioned overwintering possibly on bumblebees and other insects. That's another thing that you're looking into.
Yes, yeah. So that's something that I want to look into. Like I said, there's a few papers out there that suggest that they can survive on these other bee species. I mean, I really, really hope that they can't, because that in terms of control and, when an outbreak situation happens, it's one thing, dealing with honeybee colonies. If you've then got to sort of work into that equation, solitary bees or bumblebees, that's a whole different ball game in terms of sort of containment and stuff. So, so the research is ongoing. I'm going to be going back to Georgia shortly, working on the formic acid project. We've got other projects where we're looking at the population dynamics. When I had my sort of reproduction slide up, I said that I think that's probably actually a bit inaccurate now. So we've got lots of brood samples to go and biopsy and to sort of see what how many foundrous mites are there in that in the brood, how many nymphs and eggs and proto-nymphs and deuto-nymphs do they produce, like what proportion of males, what proportion of females, because it's a bit of a grey area. Like, there is research out there, but some of it kind of contradicts each other. And until you kind of understand that population dynamic, it's difficult. And like I said, we've got the formic acid, we've got that population thing. We've also looked at swarms and like how Tropilaelaps is transmitted in swarms and stuff. And that's been sort of really interesting. But it's early days, more sort of follow-up work to do there. It's an ongoing process, and at some point I will work in the kind of bumblebee, solitary bee experiment into the mix.
Okay. I'd like to have you back on in a few months' time when you come back from next trip or whatever, if you want to share some more information on that. I mean, it's been absolutely fascinating. I'm a little bit more happier that they're not going to be here tomorrow, but at the same time I understand the vectors of dispersal now and movement around the country. I think that we need to be careful about who we select our queens from and where we buy them from. What would worry me is if I find it's due diligence. Beekeepers need to be, I think, take it on themselves to be a little bit more, do I really need to buy a queen from there when, even though it's the cheapest, I could buy it from a place that is maybe €5 or pounds more, but it's more of a better place to originate your queens from. And I mean, Mike Palmer's just said, I totally agree 100%. There's no reason why you can't raise all your own queens in your own garden. I mean, I've done videos on it. I do queen rearing. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps we should be going back to do that. But for instance, I'll give you my scenario. Is I am a beekeeper. I'm raising queens now still. Because I've got Asian Hornet, I'm kind of running the gauntlet. I'm doing my last batch of queens. I'm making nukes every day. It's stinking hot, and that's what brought me to moan about that, because I'm tired. I'm at the end of it all, and I'm trying to raise my queens, but the problem is the Asian hornets are now starting to eat the drones, and the drones are also getting kicked out in another month. So it's all very close, where I can just tap my credit card on the table, and what happens, I've got beautiful mated queens from somewhere else in the world who can raise them for peanuts, and I'm a happy recipient. But we have to look at the mentality of that and have to think, yes, I can raise my own queens, and I should be doing that more. And maybe we could say that the UK should look at starting to raise more homegrown queens, or I mean, because that's what they used to do originally.
Yeah, and you know, there are good UK-based queen breeders as well. You know, like we don't necessarily have, you might not get them as early in the season, but like the people are out there. But like I said,
I know that.
People need to kind of look around, and you know, you can have the glossiest website in the world, but you need to kind of ask questions and say, okay, if I'm getting a queen this early in the season, is it realistic that it's been produced and spent all of its life in the UK, or has it been imported? You know, and people like people who import queens, they're not, you know, they're not doing anything illegal. They're not sort of breaking any legislation. The market is there. I think just as beekeepers as a whole, we need to look at what we do and why we keep bees. And if you just want to kind of like buy a queen and put it in a box, you know, okay, but surely it's more engaging and it's more of a craft to learn the skills and to pass those. I mean, that's what I enjoy. I enjoy passing the skills on to other people, and you know, I've mentored beginners and things like that. And that's, you know, to me, that's the fun thing. It's the community of beekeeping. Yeah, that Absolutely. Community of beekeeping has taken me all around the world to meet fantastic people and to work in fantastic places. Yeah, and that's, you know, that you're kind of limiting yourself if you just buy them off the internet. Whereas you could grow your knowledge, and you could get together with a load of local beekeepers and start raising queens. And you know, you can exchange. You know, I've bred these ones, they're pretty good, I'll swap some with you, get a bit of genetic diversity going on, get a bit of a breeding program going on, set up a mating apiary. You know, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. And yeah, and that's what I love about beekeeping. And Tropilaelaps will not discriminate against you know, when it gets here, it will kill my bees, it will kill your bees. It doesn't matter whether you're a new beekeeper with 5 colonies who's only sort of kept bees for 2 years, or whether you're a big commercial beekeeper, and whatever your like beekeeping ethos, that doesn't matter. You know, now is the time to act and to kind of put all of that aside, and you know, we need to kind of cooperate and like come up with a plan, because it's going to be quite a short window of time, I think. And you know, if it's 15 years, then great, you know, fantastic, but it might be 2 years, who knows. So but it's currently not here, so let's do something.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I've had people from all over Europe saying, you know, we, like from Turkey, we Turkish beekeepers that I find fascinating, because they do a lot of movement of bees across Turkey, and they say this is really worrying because we have to move our colonies from one side to another, just like you said about the beekeepers in Georgia, and just like we do here. I don't move my hives far, but people literally 100 miles south of me will move their hives to the acacia, move their hives to the sunflower, move their hives to the heather, and all over America, everywhere else is exactly the same. And once it starts, it's a big slippery slope, isn't it? That's the problem.
Yeah. And I you know, I think it's great that so many people have sort of dialed in to listen to this, and people are interested. And you know, I think it's going to be tough, but you've got to kind of be optimistic. And I think if beekeepers can start monitoring, if beekeepers can start educating themselves, fantastic. You know, they'll be better prepared for it. And you know, like I've said it before, now is the time to kind of get on top of this and to act. And if you feel strongly about it, contact your local association. You know, there are these sort of systems set up. And be vocal about it, because there's no point when it gets here sitting there going, oh, you know, I wish we'd done something about it. So
well, it's the same, the Asian hornet thing. I mean, when it happened, there's loads of beekeepers that are furious that if they'd have literally thrown everything at it at the start, when it was in such a small area, we would have controlled it, but nobody did. And then it was a change of government, and then they blamed it on the other government. But at the time, blame doesn't matter, because it's gone. And that's the problem we're facing again, and we can't let that happen. This is way too serious, I think, anyway. Maggie, I would just like to, on behalf of everybody out there, thank you for the research you're doing. Just to say that if you want to look at Phira Science, you'll find all the information you need. There's free videos for everybody to see, free IDs. This video will be up and posted pretty much after we finished. If you want to look at it and get all the information you need. If you want to make a donation to Phira Science, please do, because Maggie's off out there. And from what she said to me, squatting in a small tent in the middle of Georgia where it's stinking hot isn't that pleasant. So maybe we can make things different for you. If we can get people to donate, that'd be fantastic. Because to me, what the work you're doing is brilliant, and this knows no boundaries, this pest, and it. We just want to make sure that we can do everything we can until someone can find a usable solution to the problem.
Any donations would be very, very gratefully received. This we do it on a shoestring, but like this research doesn't, just flights and the whole organizing of it. And I love doing it, but we don't get paid for this. It has a big toll on our families and things like that. So if you're an eccentric millionaire or you just want to sort of donate £5, it will be very, very gratefully received. And it all goes to get you some decent.
Just to get you some decent setup and able to carry on. I mean, is there any, just to ask quickly to end, is there any other governments or any other groups that are actively investigating Tropilaelaps in terms of how it's going to spread and what you've just described?
So Project Apis have done a lot of work in the United States. So Jeff Williams and Rogan Tokay and Jeff Pettis. So they've done a lot of work in Thailand and Korea, and I think a bit of work in China. So there are groups of other researchers out there. But when you look at, say, Asian hornet research, Varroa research, chronic bee paralysis research, Tropilaelaps research is growing, and I think people are sort of becoming aware of it now, and there is this growing concern. But for a while, we've been this kind of little niche group of handful of researchers that are dealing with it. And it's a very hard thing to study. To do any of these experiments, you got to keep your colonies alive, but you want enough mites in your colonies so that you've got mites to work with. So there's that balance of managing that. Just handling them, they're tiny. The amount of times that we have sat in unair conditioned rooms and you need 800 mites to run an experiment, and the guys will be like, "How many mites have we got, Maggie?" And they'll be like, "We've got 300," and you can just see them going like, "Oh man!" And because it's just hours and hours and hours of harvesting mites. They call one of the rooms in Chiang Mai University the torture room, because they literally sit motionless and just harvest mites. But we do it because we love it, and we want to help, and we want to kind of make this difference. And there is more work sort of looking into Tropilaelaps now, and hopefully more funding. But like I said, if you'd like to donate, it would be very, very gratefully received.
Well, Maggie, thanks so much. And on behalf of everybody who's out there, thank you for the work you're doing a fantastic job. Your presentation was brilliant, and hopefully we'll have you back in a few weeks.
Yeah, happy to.
In a few months when you're back. So, take care. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining in. I'm going to be doing a few lives coming up, so stay posted. I'll keep you updated, and we'll hear the news soon. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.